It'll take what time you have left. So engrossing and lively and funny is it. In the author's own words, it's the story of how a little kid from a grey town by the pounding sea got to gallop around the world breaking bread with kings and paupers. I mean, who wouldn't want to read that adventure story? This is how she talks in an email. And it is a great adventure story because this is the story of one of the pioneers, the trailblazers of our film industry. An artist raised in her early years on the rugged west coast of Aotearoa, who grew up to become a rugged individualist, as John Clarke would say. A feminist, intent on finding by hook or by crook a way to put her stories on the screen, at a time when the ladies were still bringing a plate to mixed gatherings rather than a shot list or a camera. Sorry, Siri. I have quite a loud voice, I'm sorry. And now she's telling her own story, straight from the armpit, as she says. And what a yarn it is. The life and times of a woman described as part liar, part cowgirl, mouthy and determined by her fellow Dame Jane Campion, who knows a thing or two about strong female characters. In fact, this book is a trove of insights on loving and being loved from a headstrong mother, a tender daughter. It's a book about filmmaking, all right, but it's also a book about finding the courage and the mettle and the means to honour your own vision and tell your own story. To talk to us about writing and filmmaking and storytelling and breaking the rules and making your own seat at the table, please welcome to Featherstone Booktown the author of Gaylene's Take, Dame Gaylene Preston. So you wrote this book by accident, you told me on the phone. That's a funny thing to do by accident.
I think I've done quite a lot by accident. I travelled to Cambridge in Britain with a film I'd made called My Year with Helen. And while I was there, I got invited to Jesus College. And as when I had lived in Cambridge in the 70s, I couldn't have gone into Jesus College unless I was a cleaner because it was an all-male domain. So I thought, well, I have to take up that opportunity. And they invited me to come in order to think and reflect. And that's the beauty about a university like Cambridge. It's not so sort of goal-driven and business-driven. I found myself living like an 18th century gentleman. And
the chap's up there behind us.
And you can't even make your bed. They have bedders.
A bedder?
Yeah, no housework permitted. And meals turned on, beautiful meals. So writing came out of the brickwork.
Because there was nothing else you had to do or think about.
And people have been writing there for 400 years. You catch it like a virus.
There's some really lovely symmetries in this book and you know, a beautiful sense of completeness about some of the stories you tell, and the Cambridge connection where it all starts is very satisfying because the book actually opens in Cambridge, doesn't it? Back in, what was that, the early 1970s?
69 we first went there.
1969. I want to talk to you about institutions because I feel like that's a thread in your life and in your creative life. Tell me a bit about the hospital you worked at in Cambridge where you made pretty much your first film.
Yeah. Well, that's how I got invited to Jesus College because they had a feast for My Year with Helen. And so I was sitting next to a very polite man who said, what did you do today? And I said, well, I went round Cambridge because I'd lived there in the 70s, and I'd spent 3 years there, and I'd had a lovely day there. And he said, "Oh, what college?" And I said, "Full-born Psychiatric Hospital." I said, you probably haven't heard of it. And he said, "Oh, I'm on the board of what is now the remains of the hospital that has got 4,000 outpatients. It's a big outpatient mental health facility in Cambridgeshire." And he said, "I'll find the superintendent." So the next thing,
You found them.
I find myself in Jesus College. So what am I writing about? I'm writing about those days of anti-psychiatry, working in a big psychiatric hospital that was a former, what was it called? It was called a county asylum. So 700-bed psychiatric hospital that was incredibly forward-looking, an open hospital, no locked wards. I'm sure there were a lot of things that went on there, Noelle, that weren't great, but certainly for me, being the assistant librarian, the library was a place where everybody came. It was a county library in the middle of a psychiatric hospital. So that meant that when people came into the library, they were book readers. And that's patients, hospital superintendent, everybody in between. And they got a chatty Kiwi girl, i.e. me.
What did they make of you, do you think?
They called me an Antipodean. I hadn't heard that before. I don't know.
Because you must have had a way with them. I mean, those of you who read the book know that Gaylene's very first Super 8 film was filmed in this hospital, using a lot of the people who were residents in the hospital at the time. So in order to get a project like that up, to have your cast, they must have trusted you. You must have had a relationship with them.
Well, it was more that we started gradually. I got the job in the library not because I knew anything about the Dewey Decimal System. I did not. But they wanted me to produce the hospital Christmas play. So they were thrilled to not have to do that. For some reason, the play was linked to the library. And the current librarian did not want to be producing the Christmas play. 3 years later, when we had established drama therapy in the hospital, and we were doing improvisational drama with institutionalised people, it became clear to me that they thought they were getting ready to do the play again. So in a way, it was the other way around. I had to think of a way to give them an end product to what they were doing that wasn't a play, because a play is in theatre you have to learn the lines and you have to repeat everything. And these people were institutionalised and they repeated every day. So the idea of drama therapy was to cut across that. So I had a friend in Cambridge. We had a drama group called the Whole Earth Drama Group. We were bringing a fusion of Brecht and acid rock to Cambridge.
It was the 70s.
Well, it wasn't entirely successful. Like,
Shocker.
Once the band struck up.
They could tolerate the Brecht, but not the prog rock.
Hello, Jimmy. What film does is you shoot a shot and then you shoot another shot and it's all new, every shot. So I had a friend who had an 8mm camera and she said she could come and shoot some film. So we started, and then I came home and found a little pile of film cans on the table and a note that said, "Have eloped with Tony, love Suzanne."
So you become the director.
Yeah, another accident.
Yes.
I had to deliver
A film.
a film.
And this is before you had your epiphany, because, I want to talk to you about institutions, but I also want to talk to you about baths, because baths have been important, haven't they, for the development of your vocation as a filmmaker?
And as a speaker, I managed to have one before this.
What's the deal with the bath? What happens when you're in the bath?
Well, I think baths, I think a sort of back to the womb bath. I have big, deep, hot baths, and I think I don't meditate exactly, but I think I'm sure people here would agree that there's some sort of connection between unconscious, creative world and water, especially hot water. And for me, very hot water. So, I often do it purposely now. So, if I've got something I need to really think about, I'll have a bath on it.
And it's a lovely passage in the book where you're talking about, you're in England somewhere, I think maybe outside London, or is it Buckinghamshire, and you're in the bath, and this is when you decide that you can be a filmmaker. I mean, you've already made a film, but this is when you really own it. You really think, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Because I've been to art school, and I wasn't a happy camper at art school, unlike my friend here, Dame Robin, who went to Elam. I went to Elam around about the same time, and it wasn't a happy, it was kind of, I didn't fit. And
it sounds like you had fun, though, from the book.
Yeah.
There were good times.
Yeah. It was 1966.
Sure was. And it was a long way from home for you, wasn't it? I mean, you'd grown up. I mentioned Greymouth in my opening remarks. And from there, went up to Napier with a cabbage in your bag. And grew up really, you were a young child in your early teens in Hawke's Bay, and then you went off down to art school.
Yeah. I mean, I just really wanted to go to art school. That was my dream. And thank you to the teachers at Colenso High School who made sure that I could get to art school. But I wasn't outstanding. And I could do a bit of acting, and I could do, that's a participatory culture in New Zealand. And when I went to Britain, I started to work out not to say all the things that I've been doing here because they didn't believe me. So in New Zealand at that time, in 1966, through the 60s, we thought ourselves to be a cultural desert, when actually we were quite the opposite. So I just grew up in a highly creative, arty-farty environment, though, it was kind of like you were required. So if you could play the spoons, you had to come to halls like this and entertain. And if you were a little kid like me, I was in there.
Now, what about the acting? Because Dame Gaylene Preston was a very well-regarded Eliza Doolittle, I know, in a production in Napier, was it?
Yeah, that was a school play.
Yeah. But did the acting bug bite?
I was in an orientation play. I always thought, if I'd had bigger tits, I would have been an actor. Because,
Directing's gain.
Yeah. In those days, to get cast, it was a male domain, and I just didn't have the physical attributes required. But I think when I found film accidentally so many years later in Britain, I sort of thought, oh, this is all right because help is available. You know, you're never alone when you're making a film. There's always someone who is a specialist. So if you're a generalist artist, which is what I was, I wouldn't have been able to say that's what I was, but that's what I was, then film's great because help is available.
And your story as you tell it, and I'll come back, I want to ask you some writing questions, but you know, it is the story of some great collaborations. You know, you and Alan Bollinger,
Yep.
Al Ball, you and Robin Lang as a producer, and you're very funny talking about the early days when you and Robin Lang sort of teamed up and started making films together, how nervous the men, mostly, would get when the two of you walked into a room together, because not only was the director a woman, the producer was a woman as well. What are they going to do?
Yeah.
Do they
There'd
get
be a
past it?
certain amount of touching of ties, looking nervously at the door behind us, and then there were a bit of chit-chat, and then they'd say, is this all who's coming? And we'd go, yeah? And they go, oh, so we talk to you, do we? And we'd say, yeah? And they go, ooh. So I think we were lucky, though, because there wasn't anything established. So you could make your own way. And I knew that the people who were making films in New Zealand, who I knew, they didn't know what they were doing either. And so there wasn't a main road, and there wasn't an established way. And actually those years at Fulbourn Hospital where I worked in a very particular, progressive, open institution, I learnt so much about systems and how they work and the psychology of systems. So I became an accidental system analysis person, which I think has been very handy dealing with the funding bodies and the business in general.
And look, those stories alone are, you know, maybe unintentionally comedic, of you facing one after another panel from the Film Commission. So nice to see so many of you here tonight. You know, looking for funding for a film about, for example, 7 women's stories of what happened in World War II to them. You know, films that they weren't necessarily seeing any crashing demand for.
No, and I mean, I think we had, it was the third time lucky that we got the money for that, and we got it accidentally. Well, you know, there was a strategy, but we knew that particular meeting had no other applications. And that particular meeting of the Film Commission had no other applications because the new chair, who was a neoliberal new chair, a businessman put onto the Film Commission to sort out these pesky filmmakers, he announced that they wouldn't be funding films that they'd turned down before, that they wouldn't be screening them, they wouldn't be funding films that couldn't screen in multiplexes, and they wouldn't fund films that had no international
Distribution.
obvious appeal. So I said to Robin, right, we've got one. It's called War Stories, and it's 3 out of 3 there. Let's test this. And we got the money. And we got the money because the other people on the commission didn't really agree with the policy.
So you managed to, it played it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But only by being really bolshy and cheeky.
I wish people talked about this more. This is one of the services that I think your book does, Gaylene, is talk about, you know, when we see finished pieces of art, there's always the sense that, oh, this had to exist. You know, this book or this film or this piece of music. But actually what your book shows is the struggles and the battles and also the sort of strokes of luck that an artist needs in order to persevere and bring the work to fruition.
Well, that's right. And I think it's really, when you're trying to do a project and people, there's barricades and they're represented by people, but they're actually part of a system. And, if you can kind of get through the cracks, but no success guaranteed.
You have, we mentioned war stories our mothers never told us. You have a special strength and a special genius when it comes to stories about things we're not supposed to talk about, right? And stories with secrets at the heart of them, and that's very much the story of that documentary. You got your mother to tell her secrets on camera in an indelible way. When it came to, and you tell some of your secrets in this book, when it came to approaching that question of secrets, as it applied to your own life. I guess this is a very, very long-winded way of saying why write a memoir,
Well, that's right, and you'd know about that too, because, we both had different but difficult mothers who were full of secrets. So, as I think I can imagine from your wonderful book, I can imagine you as a girl knowing these secrets and wanting to know.
But Gaylene, I never interviewed mine. What you did is remarkable to get her to tell those stories.
Oh, well, I didn't interview my mother. I asked Judith Fife, who, with Hugo Manson, founded the Oral History Centre. And I asked Judith to interview my mother, and she said no.
Why did she say no?
We get asked, because I said, I think there's a secret there, and I think it's to do with what happened during the war. And my father spent a year and a half in an Italian prison camp and escaped into Switzerland and was perfectly happy about the war. Not happy, but settled. And my mother, it was like she just had the stone in her shoe about that period. She was angry about it. And she was angry with him for going away in the first place. So I grew up in that relationship. So I said to Judith, well, could you interview my mother? And she said, certainly not. We don't do that sort of thing. We get asked to do that all the time. And that is not what the Oral History Centre is for. And we were having cocktails at the time, looking out to sea in Oriental Bay, and I managed to talk her into it. Yeah. I talked her into it by saying, we haven't got the story of the women who would have been partners with the men who built this hall. We don't have their version. We hardly have the men's version. From the horse's mouth, or from the armpit, as I might say. But there's a whole generation of women we haven't really got their version. They saw their brothers off to World War One. They saw their husband. They saw their sons off to World War Two 20 years later. And by the time I'm sitting at Oriental Bay talking to Judith, they've gone. So Judith understood that grabbing the next generation on sound tape was a good idea.
So you didn't just talk her into it, you made the case for it. You made the historical, the social history of this. And this is a theme in your work, because where that came from, as you explain in the book, you're watching a piece of film, a piece of film of soldiers, and there's a cutaway of some women. And you noticed that this is something we haven't seen before. We haven't seen the women's side of the story.
So maybe I was born to do that, and my experience of being in Cambridge and part of the women's liberation movement, and then coming back to New Zealand at the time that I did, and knowing brilliant people like Judith Fife, who are founders in their own right. We're talking about trailblazing people here. So, you know, I think that the women's story is often just ignored. It's almost like it's not there. Even now, I'd say there's things that happen around the place, and I think, what's the story with the women?
And that's an image from the book again, you as a very young girl sitting under the table, listening to the women. That's what you were doing, weren't you?
Yeah.
Ears flapping, I think they called it.
Yeah.
I love that as a key to the filmmaker you went on to become, because you talk about those women. Tui, your mother's friends, they'd come round and they would talk in plain language, you said, about pies and about cooking and those things, and you took notice.
Well, I get under the... Oh my God,
Sorry.
I've turned my phone off and it's still listening to me.
It's possessed.
I need help. I think when I was little, I liked drawing, and it was quite good to be ignored because you could find things out. So I would get under the table. I would be drawing under the table, and then the women would arrive, and nobody would shoo me out. So I'd listen. So, I mean, the stories are so good. Yeah. Like things little kids aren't supposed to hear. Like Famie Rochford would say, Snowy came home on his bike, absolutely sozzled, drove his bike into the blackberries, the garage has got no floor, he's lying back there roaring like a bull. And I said, you can stay there, you stupid bastard. So I'm hearing these things about these neighbours from under the table. And of course it's, you know, you're always, little kids are always looking for clues, aren't they? You know, that they're really watching. It's the things the adults don't want the kids to know that are the very things the kids want to know because they can feel it.
That's the exciting stuff.
It
It's
is.
the secrets.
And stories.
Yes. And one of the satisfactions of reading this, I guess, no, let's stay with stories for a second, and I want to talk about lies, because in chapter 4, the lying comes up. Jane Campion describes you as a liar, as a compliment, I think. And the lying seems to go hand in hand with your discovery of the audience. I'm sorry, I'll say it more clearly. I feel like this is like Mr. Wrong, you know, instead of like a bad car, we've got like a bad phone.
That phone is turned off. You can have another go.
Bless it, Craig, bless it.
I feel a film coming on.
But same. A Gaylene Preston film.
You were asking about... I was going to call... The first title for this was Natural Born Liar.
Great title.
Because I think when we tell stories, we have to change things and move them around in order to tell the truth. You know, it's the truth as the author might feel it. So I do think there's a certain amount of fibbing required when you're telling a story. And I've always thought, you know, an autobiography called Natural Born Liar would be funny. But it's now called Gaylene State. But yeah, I did tell a few lies when I was little. I try not to now, knowingly.
Yes. And yet, writing a memoir, and this is something I struggled with as well, you have to make your peace, don't you, with the fact that the story you're telling is a version of a history. It's not it's your version of the story. And I'm struck by how, honourable you are in your dealings. You honour the dead, you respect the living, and you make clear when something is your version of events, your take, Gaylene's take. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's particularly important when it comes to autobiographical work. I mean, we made four 1-hour television pieces, a television series based on Sonia Davies' autobiography. And, once the version's written down, that's the version. And there were a couple of times there where Sonia would do an article in the Women's Weekly, and it would have different details than she'd written in her book. And by which time we had shot what she had in the book. So I'd have to say, Sonia, when did you meet Red? Did you meet him at the railway station or did you meet him at the dance in Te Horo? And she'd go, I could have met him at the railway station. I go, stick to one version and use the one in the book, Sonia.
It's true though, isn't it? Because there are different, I don't know, maybe this is right or waffle, but it feels like there's different levels of truths as well.
Yeah, there is.
There's emotional truth.
Yeah.
As well as factual or historical truth.
Well, having spent quite some time working with memory, because oral histories are really interesting because you get one person's version of something and, that's what happened. And then you get someone else's version and they're just sitting at a different part of the room and tell a completely different story, both of which are authentic. And then you get a third and a fourth and a fifth and a sixth, and you start to get a story net because we've all got our own version.
A story net.
And memory is incredibly colourful and does not remember facts. That's why they have long trials.
What was it like to...
Because people can't remember what they saw.
What was it like to you to listen back to Tui's memories? Judith Fife interviewed your mother about this time, which, as you say, was like a stone in her shoe. And, knowing the story, finding the story out for you, hearing her say it. What was that like?
Well, I didn't listen to the tape. Judith came and she talked to Tui and she loved Tui and she loved her story, and I got the tape and the abstract, and she'd say, Have you
listened?
Have you listened? And I'd say, oh no, but I will. And actually 2 years later we decided, we didn't have the money, but we just decided we'd film 5 interviews, and I filmed Tui. So I was sitting in the dusk behind the camera with my mother beautifully lit by elbow, talking to Judith behind a black curtain, and that's when I heard the story.
And what was the story?
Well, the story was about how she had fallen. My father was missing, believed killed. And I think that missing is a very hard thing. There will be people here who will know about missing maybe, but my mother's idea on, she decided he was dead and she couldn't bear missing. She couldn't bear the complete, it's just, there's nowhere to go with
it's
missing.
A limbo, isn't it?
She couldn't live. She had her little boy. She was living with her mother, with her sisters in a little house. And she just kind of cut to the chase and got a job in the council and decided he was dead and fell for her boss, who fell for her straight back. And then the telegram arrived that said he's coming home Thursday, kind of thing. So it wasn't quite like that, but I think psychologically for her it was. So that's an interesting thing, you know, factually it's probably a matter of a few weeks, but in terms of the story, it's forever. So my mother was always living with a man in the freezer, which relates to Perfect Strangers.
Only you would say it like
Although
that.
I didn't realise it.
Yes.
You know, it was unconscious, but
He was with her. He was haunting her in a way.
he was probably living down the road. I don't know.
And that's a story that had enough of a power that you not only eventually, you know, put it on tape, made a documentary about it. You made a film about it as well. You made a drama about it.
Yeah. So, you know, if you have an author in the family, that's one thing. If you have a filmmaker in the family, it's probably slightly worse. It's gonna be in a cinema with a premiere and a red carpet.
Why film? I mean, now that you've written a manuscript as well, you know, a book, you've said, you know, people pay attention when they're together in the dark, looking at someone's face on a screen made large, and these are people who'd never get attention otherwise.
Yeah.
Is that why film? Because it focuses the attention?
Yeah. I'm a woman on a mission. I'm only going to want to focus attention on things that I'm outraged enough to stir myself to do the schlep that you have to do. The filmmaking's pure pleasure, but there's so much around filmmaking that's about raising the money and dealing with. You can't just write a script and put it on the screen. There's all sorts of barricades, comment that goes on around the writing of a script. Whereas writing a book, write your book.
It's a pleasure, isn't it? You're getting your bed made, they're cooking for you. Lovely.
That's right.
What's not to
It was
like?
when it began, yeah.
But what about the collaboration side? I mean, writing a book is a collaborative experience. You know, you do have an editor and a publisher, but maybe not to the extent of film.
Oh no, film, you, as I said, help is available and sometimes you wish it would go away.
The help.
Yeah, no. I was blessed to have Ashley Young edit this, and I didn't really know what a book editor did. I mean, I know what a film editor does, but Ashley would kind of take it away and iron it and bring it back, and it would be just that much easier to read. It would be the same, but it would be easier to read. And we were blessed because, well, I was blessed because Ashley would come round with her changes every chapter, and then I would read that chapter to her, so we kept my voice. So I was really well looked after in the editing department. But I would do things like say, let's take chapter 7 and make it chapter 3. and Ashley wouldn't do that. But that's the film, that's the difference with film, because film is always going to be seen by the audience in order. So structure is everything. The whole way the story moves structurally is everything with film storytelling. That's where the emotional heartbeat is. And with a book, especially a memoir, you can dip in, you can read it, you can read the middle.
I always think that's deranged. Who starts a book in the middle?
Some
people
people
do, don't they? But no, or the end.
Well, not your memoir, but
Well, they could if they wanted, I suppose.
I often find I like, you know, with a chronological autobiography, I like to read the sort of early adulthood first, and then I go back to the childhood, and that's just my training as an art therapist, you know.
And there's a beautiful, I guess that explains, it's an insight into the lovely circularities and the resonances in your book. I mean, you talk about in the foreword the idea of this writing as a footprint.
Yeah.
I love that. In what way is it a footprint?
Well, it's like your book's a footprint. You know, like in 10 years' time, I'll be gone. It's there, and it. You know how a footprint goes on the water and on the sand, and it fills with water, and then the tide comes in and it's gone. Well, I think that's how I feel about that. Yeah.
I just want to come back to my year with Helen, because that brought you back to Cambridge again, you know, those circularities. And it sort of ties in with what you were saying about the systems analysis, because there you are at the UN. You know, they didn't know what to do with you there, you said, which is similar to Cannes, really, because they didn't know what to do with you there either, did they?
No.
So what do they think you were when you were following Helen Clark around the UN?
Well, I made that film with one other person, Catherine Madigan, and it was made by the two of us, Catherine being very diplomatic and me being really cheeky. So I mean, it's ridiculous at the UN. They have a media prevention department while complaining that everything they do isn't reported on. They make it really hard. So you could say, well, we're here. Could I sit there? And they go, no, security, you can't go there. And it's policed all the time. So we had to make it clear that we were not the news and we were not media. We were a documentary crew. So I wore my trellis leather jacket with the bling, and I wore my hat and sometimes leopard print trousers, and did my best to be unforgettable and unlikely. And they had people in the media department going, she's in a documentary. When are they going to screen that documentary? Midnight.
Did they think you were a midnight cowboy?
They just thought, and we would film and then we would go away and work and come back and film again a few weeks later. And after a while, because I always wore the same jacket and the same hat, and I always had my camera with me, they go, hey, it's the Kiwi crew. And they knew we didn't know what was going on. And we knew we didn't know what was going on. So we were filming the journalists, all of whom seemed to know what was going on. Funny thing being, they didn't know. When it actually came to the announcement, we were the only crew there. They had to ask us for our footage.
And what was that like, that moment to find out? That probably it wasn't a surprise to you?
No, by then it was pretty clear that Helen... I mean, the UN, my goodness, they were never going to give that job to Helen Clark. She was walking around with a screwdriver sticking out her top pocket, and she knew exactly how to fix it. And there's a lot of forces in there to make sure it's not fixed. There's jobs for life in there. So unfortunately, we were watching the terrible tragedy of the UN.
And what's it like being with someone, you know, when they find out? You know, we're talking about those intimate moments in your mother's life. An intimate moment for Helen Clark as well, to find out that something you want is not going to be possible.
I'd say to Helen, how do you feel, Helen? She go, I don't feel anything. It's not about feeling, Gaylene. So I go, oh, yeah, okay, I get it. You know, I think I managed in the end to get Helen, to get a moment with Helen where, you know, I just said, what a thing, eh? I was racking my brains to think, how can I make this not an interview? Because Helen is media trained. You know, dealing with people who are media trained is really, really hard. And I knew I had 10 minutes with Helen and the film rested on it. So that's My Year with Helen took 2 years, and I wanted to think what was the question I could ask, and I said, "What a thing, eh?" You know, what a thing, eh? And it's a lovely Kiwi thing.
Simple
You know, that
language.
we've got those things that we
Plain
say.
language.
Yeah. We've got those things we say like, "Oh, you get that a bit." And you get that a bit can cover getting an Oscar to losing your money.
You get that.
You get that a bit. So, yeah, what a thing, eh? And then I got the response from Helen.
The
that's in
moment
the
of
film.
vulnerability,
Yeah.
the thing. And there always has to be, you're very honest about this as well, and I appreciated this, the shard of ice, right, that we need. Even if we're daughters, even if we, even if it's family, as an artist, you're always looking for the moment. You're always thinking, is this material?
Yes.
What can I do with this?
It's Dame Gillian Whitehead. Are you in the audience, Gillian? There she is.
Is there anyone in the audience
She
who
took-
isn't a dame?
Yeah, we've got a few.
Oh my God.
We're actually fully damed up.
Oh my God. We are damed up to the nines.
Gillian said to me, the artist has a sliver of ice in their soul. And I hadn't heard that before, and I thought, damn right. You know, it's there's once you're doing the work, it is all consuming. And it's a very interesting thing to be doing creative work that you're totally committed to and being a mother, and you would know about that.
And I love how you set that context in your book. You know, the time in your life when you're the busiest, you're going to New York, you're going to Europe, you're going to premieres all over the place. You're living with Tui, your mum, and your daughter, Chelsea. And there are 3 generations of women in this house. I think I was in Wellington. And you describe, Tui's in the front room and you come home jet lagged and you walk Chelsea to school and you go home and I don't know what you do after that. You're very jet lagged. But this image of a filmmaker who is surrounded by the line of women, it's a lovely context in which to understand your work as well.
Yeah, and it's how we live, isn't it? And it's interesting you mentioned that time because my daughter is now writing a film about it.
Is she?
Yeah.
Because she's a filmmaker and an actress, of course. And you've worked together. What was that like?
Oh, marvellous, yeah. Lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, both of those states are very honestly rendered in the book. You don't shy away from the difficulties of, especially that influence of Tui, over your life. She's really, sort of made the shape of your life, even though what you did with your life was so different from her frame of reference. She wanted you to be a piano teacher, did she?
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, my whole generation, born just after the war, I mean, they came back, those veterans, they came back from the war and they had seen the horror and they had seen the result of rampant uber capitalism and fascism, and they came back here to this little country and they built something different. It wasn't without huge arguments and it wasn't a straight road, and we know that rocky road that we have now, but as the kiddies, I was born in 47, we were the lucky recipients, and I got a play-based, child-based education. And of course, my mother left school when she was 13, so did my father. And their world was so different. And I think Tui would have liked a little girl that she could dress up and, well, she did dress us up, she sewed beautifully, but I was never gonna just do that. I was sort of on my bike from an early age.
Yes.
Triking around the neighbourhood, poking my nose into other people's business, listening to what was being said under the table.
But
and just being a nosy Parker. Yeah. I'm still doing that, actually.
It's a good trait in a director. But it changed Tui's life as well. I mean, Well, what were the two of you doing in Phyllis Diller's house in LA?
Oh, that was great.
I bet it was.
Phyllis, yeah. We took the War Stories women to Los Angeles, apart from Auntie Jean, who'd passed by then. So it was Chelsea and I travelling with 6 80-year-olds and being hosted by the New Zealand High Commissioner, Mr. Terry Baker, in the New Zealand house in Brentwood. And Terry was a great friend of their. I think New Zealanders, we believe in knowing the neighbours. We actually believe in that. And Terry knew Phyllis, who lived over the road. Phyllis Diller, amazing, trailblazing female comic. I mean, she was a friend of Lucy.
Lucille Ball.
Yeah, and so the next thing, we're all invited for cocktails with Phyllis. Phyllis had an amazing house.
I bet she did.
She had a wig room. She'd had famous facelifts, and there we were, and it was quite an
An adventure.
We all got to sit in her. It wasn't a Rolls Royce, was it? What was it, Michael? Oh, Phyllis had all these old cars, and her house remains quite famous, and she was a great mate of Bob Hope and all of them. And when we went there, she was signing autographs for us, and Pamela Quill, one of the women in War Stories, is a very beautiful woman, said to her, "Oh, you're a lovely lady." And Phyllis is signing this. She said, "Yeah, but you got the cheekbones." And Pamela said, "Oh, I didn't mean what you look like. I was talking about you." And Phyllis said, "Yeah, but it took a lot of work." So, that was a wonderful adventure because, you could take those women anywhere and they would charm everybody by purely being themselves. And it made me very, very proud of that generation because, they gave us the confidence to get off the veranda and go into the world and do all that sort of thing. It's easy to underestimate them. Drugs, sex, rock and roll, we thought it was the 60s generation, but it was actually them.
It's actually the 40s, the 30s even.
It was them.
Yeah, we didn't invent it. We're coming, unfortunately, towards the end of time, and I wanted to leave time for a couple of questions. If anyone has a question, you can just put your hand up. But I have one more while you're thinking. Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy writing?
I did. I think it's a filmmaker, you spend your life writing. So, I've had something to do with all the films I've made in terms of writing the script. So I'm very used to present tense. The thing about writing a book is, as opposed to writing a script is a blueprint for a movie. So the actual words aren't as important. But with a book, you have to actually think about how those words are going to flow and where the emotional heart is. And I found that really, really lovely. I did enjoy it. The hard bit is getting your ass on the seat.
Yes.
As we all know. Yeah.
And do you stay there then when the bum is in the chair? Can you do do you do long bursts or do you need to get up and have a cup of tea? And
when I was at Jesus College, I would wake up, have a cup of tea. I was allowed to make myself a cup of tea, not wash the cup. And I'd go back to bed and I'd start writing. Quite often pencil and paper, sometimes computer. And then I'd have to race into the shower and get down to this gourmet breakfast they cooked in this 18th century beautiful building. and then I'd come back after breakfast and take my computer and go somewhere beautiful and carry on. I think as long as you've done sort of 20 to 30 minutes in the morning, it's very hard if you're a mother. What do you do?
Get up very early.
Get up very early.
Yeah. I think Pip Adam talked about it here a couple of years ago, that she had realised there was a time in the day when no one needed her, which would be between 8 and 20 past 8. And that's how she wrote a novel, because I think that was just so inspiring to know you just do a little bit, but if you do a little bit every day, you can get it done.
And Patricia Grace did the same.
Yes.
And I mean,
but Patricia Grace was phenomenal. I mean, she would write at the kitchen table, she told me. She would teach, she would do her day job teaching, come home, feed the kids, bath everyone, put them to bed, and then she'd write.
She'd write. And I had a bit of a breakthrough about that because I was usually going to write after 3 o'clock in the afternoon when I was writing scripts and things before my baby was born. But then it's out the window. And I was in London and I read an article from Virginia Woolf's sister, Vanessa Bell, and she was a painter, and she had a retrospective at the Hayward Gallery, and very old lady, well, I think she was quite young now, but she was in her 80s, and they took her around her retrospective and she said not a word. And they got to the end and they said, well, what do you think? And she said, well, one didn't feel like one had particularly a lot of talent, but one was rather amazed at what one could do between the hours of 9 and 1 every day. And I thought, my daughter's at school now, 9 and 1. And that means I can make my phone calls later. I can do the... So that was my breakthrough, really. 9 and 1.
9 to 1, magic hours. Does anyone have a question? You can put your hand up if you do. Yeah, at the back in the hat.
Beg your pardon?
Do you still like the West Coast?
Just came back from Hokitika. Yeah. Turanga Waiwai. And I have a little teardrop caravan nestled under the veranda of the Bollinger estate. And I'm very happy to spend time there when I can.
Great question.
Yeah.
And I'm not telling.
I do. I'm fortunate to be working with Dame Robin White, and we're dreaming up a film that will be a prayer for the future. Yeah, I dream this film.
Well,
so I'm shadowing Robin.
Well, that's a beautiful and hopeful note to end on, I think, if nobody has any other questions. Oh, yeah, we've got one more.
Well, I think I was doing that. Somebody asked me the other day, when did you decide you were an artist? Well, I think I just was one. I was drawing or painting or singing or dancing, but little children do. Little children are huge artists. They really are. There's nothing they can't do. And somehow we kind of forget that part of us. And, in the Western world, the arts have become so sort of professionalised and siloised. But when you're with young children, they it's a drawing, it's a song, it's whatever you feel like. So channeling that, I think, I'm not sure. I think I just had a series of happy accidents. Yeah, and I think it's good to have a purpose. I never had a dream, and I didn't have goals. I don't believe in dreams and goals, because once you've missed a goal, then you miss the next goal, and then you feel stink, and the next minute you're under the duvet, and the dream's gone poof, and it's all impossible, and you have to go and leave the country. I don't know. I think it's good to have a purpose, and my purpose has been, since I was little, to have equal airtime with my brother, who's here. Ted, there he is, lives in Martinborough. And so, you know, Ted was doing things, so I thought, well, I'll do it.
And you have to give yourself permission, don't you, at a certain point? I think you've talked about that. Yeah. Being able, just to follow on from that question, you know, being able to say, I claim this for me, I'm going to do this.
Well, other people aren't going to give you permission. Never. Because they're just not. And I think as women, we particularly think that somebody is going to give us a hand and help us. But I think it's easier if you've got a mission, because then you've got a reason and you've got something you want to say, and then channeling it becomes not an issue.
Not an issue. Dame Gaylene Preston, thank you so much for coming to Booktown. Thank you for talking to us. Thank you for being here tonight. Please join me in thanking Dame Gaylene Preston.
Thank you, Noelle.
Sorry. Thank you to Featherstone's Noelle McCarthy for bringing out a beautiful conversation tonight. Yeah, we are, you know the drill, but we're back here at 10, poetry. See you soon.
That was great.
Yes, I forgot to say that. It's soft, isn't it?
Well, whatever the trigger was, kept happening.
I loved how it was talking to me. I was thinking I'm not asking the right questions. The phone hates it. So cute.
Thanks, Gaylene. How are you?
I'll sign up. Will you sign mine?
That was lovely.
Oh yeah, you go get your pen. How do I spell? Oh yeah. How do I spell?
O-L-L-Y, the proper way. Yeah. And Dame Gaylene, could I get you to sign your book for me as well?
I think you're going to the signing table. Are we bringing Gaylene to the signing table?
Thank you so much.
Or not?
Sorry, Dame Gaylene, could I get a really quick interview with you? Just a few words about Booktown?
Sure, but I just have to sign. Come out while we're signing books.
Okay, yeah, cool. Yep.